Alright guys, this is part 3 of my tutorial series for working with the Blender exporter tool created by user Boo342. So let's just dive in. Here we go. Alright everybody, so in our last video I had you go and complete the modeling of the robot walker. As well, you should have gone and renamed all of the object names. It's just to keep everything organized and apparent when we're modeling. We're able to tell what we're working on. Now we're not going to be needing the character turnaround images any longer because we've completed the modeling process. So we can just go up here and we can turn those off. So on robot background, we'll just hide that from view. So now the next step, what we have to do is actually, you'll notice that the 3D cursor is located at the top here. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to bring that down to the world origin point. So it's very simple to do that. We just press and hold Shift and C together. And you'll see that it immediately moves the 3D cursor to the world origin point. Next, we'll use our selection tool to highlight all of the objects within our model. Now you're going to notice the origin points for all of our objects are visible here. We can see them all. Now, in order for the animation to work correctly with this plugin that we're using for the N64, we have to bring all of those coordinates, the origin points, to the world origin point. So to do that, we go up here to Object, Set Origin, and we'll say origin to 3D cursor. So it's going to move all of those origin points for each object right down to the world origin point, which is where we have our 3D cursor. So bang, there we go. And so all of them are now located here. And that's used as a reference point when we're actually performing animations and creating animation sequences. So our next step is to actually apply a bone structure to this model. And so to do that, we simply press Shift A to add, and then we select armature for a bones armature. And now you should see down here at the origin point, the first bone that we're going to be using in our model. It's created there right at the bottom for us to begin. Next, we'll navigate over here to our Object Data Properties tab, and under the Viewport Display, there's a checkbox here, an option to select In Front. This will make sure to always show the armature bones in the viewport overlaid on top of your model. This is way more efficient when you're positioning the bones. And next we're going to move this bone up into the neck object of the robot. So what we'll do is we just make sure that we have it selected, and we'll hit Tab to go into edit mode. And then we'll hit numpad 1 to go to a front view, and then we'll hit G to grab. And we're going to bring that up into the center position of the neck object here, and then we'll hit numpad 3 to go to a side view, hit G to grab again, and we'll just shift that into the center as best we can. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but just do the best you can. Now we'll select the top of the bone, press G to grab, and we'll extend that up into the middle of the head object here. And we'll go back to front view, and as long as it's centered as best you can. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, it's just sort of what you feel is a good spot and a good center position. There, that's good for me. Okay, and with the top of the bone selected, we'll hit numpad 3, and then we'll hit E to extrude, and then we'll drag out another bone, and we're going to bring that right down to the corner of the head object here. So a front view, and that looks pretty good. I'm good with that. Now we'll just highlight the neck bone, and we're going to rename this. So we'll hit F2, and we're going to call this root, and that will be the primary bone of the bone structure for this robot model. And next we'll select the head bone, and we'll do the same. We'll hit F2, and we'll rename this to head. Enter. And if we navigate over here to the bones armature drop-down list, you will see that we have the primary root bone for the neck and then the child of that bone is the head bone. And it shows the hierarchy there accordingly. And next we're going to start adding the bones for the legs. Now make sure you are in edit mode and select the bottom ball of the root bone and press E to extrude and drag down. Then select the bone and press G to grab it, and we're going to move that bone over to the left leg. And now we're going to repeat this process by extruding and creating new bones, and we'll position those accordingly for each of the remaining sections of the leg. We'll go to a front view and we'll reposition those. So we'll zoom in a little bit here. And then what we're going to do, we can even shift around and change the viewport to make sure we have the proper points selected. We'll go back to a front view and we can shift those a little bit. So we press G to grab and we can move those around to a point where we think it centers it correctly. And we'll do that for each of the different points on the bone. And we can even shift this downward if we need to zoom in a little bit more. We'll grab that, hit 3 for a side view, and then we'll hit G to grab. And we can move that accordingly. Front view. We can even shift here. Front view, G to grab. So that looks pretty good to me. Now it's probably a good idea that we rename these bones that we just created for the left leg. And we can easily do that just by highlighting the bone as we did before, and we hit F2. We'll call this left leg bone 1. Enter. F2. Left leg bone 2. And then here we hit F2 and we'll paste left leg bone 3. Highlight that, F2. Paste left leg bone number 4. Enter. And then last but not least, left leg bone number 5. And now if we extend this, we should see we have all of the data here. So we have our left leg bone 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We can actually rename this. We can call that root bone. We'll call this bone. And there we go. Now that we've renamed everything accordingly here, we can now go and I'll create the right leg bone structure. So here we go now. Now, one critical step that we have to make sure we do, and that is to properly parent the main root bone to both of the bone structures for the left and right leg. So the way that we do that is we make sure that we're in edit mode. That's a critical step. Next we select leg bone 1 for the left leg, and then we press and hold shift, and then we click the root bone, which is the bone that we want to make as parent to the left leg. And so then we press Control P, and that's make parent, and then we will say keep offset, and that allows the offset here to be present. And it shows that it's become a parent by showing this dotted line here. So we're going to repeat that step for the right leg. So we select right leg bone 1, press and hold shift, and then click on the root bone. Then we hit Control P, make parent, and we say keep offset. And there we go. So that's a very critical step, so you have to make sure you do that. So now our next step is to set up what's called inverse kinematics. And this essentially just helps us to animate the character when we need to position the bone structure and the model into different positions for when we need to lock in some keyframes. So while you're in edit mode, so we can change our perspective here. And what we're going to do is we're going to select the bottom end of the leg bone 1 for the left leg. And we'll go back to the side view here. So we'll press numpad 3. And now we're going to press E to extrude, and we're going to drag this out to about here, and we'll release. And we're going to do the same for the heel joint. So we'll actually zoom in here a little bit. We can just zoom in here if we need to, and we'll select this point on the foot bone, and we'll hit side view. So we'll hit numpad 3, and then we'll hit E to extrude and drag that out to about there. We can even extend that out a little further if we want. We'll zoom out and we'll hit numpad 1 for front view, numpad 3 for the side view. Now these are essentially just little handles that we've created that are going to help us to position the robot leg bone structure when we're trying to animate and position the robot into different positions for keyframes. Now for this bone that we just created, we're going to press Alt P and then clear parent. And as well, we're going to zoom out a little bit more here. We're going to go to a side view, and then we're going to make sure we have that bone selected, and we're going to press G to grab, and we're just going to bring it back to about here. And the one on the heel here, we can actually just leave it there in place. But we do have to make sure that we select it and clear the parent as well. So then we hit Alt P and say clear parent. Next we have to make sure that we select both of the inverse kinematics pull bone and the target bone. So this one here is the IK pull bone, and we have to go down here to our bone properties tab, and we uncheck the deform option here. And we have to do that as well for the IK target bone. So we just make sure that we uncheck the deform option for both of those. So now we'll select the upper IK pull bone, and we'll press F2 to rename it. And then we're going to call this left leg IK pull. Then we'll select the IK target bone at the ankle, and we'll press F2, and we'll call this left leg IK target. So there you can see both of those bones here. Next we'll select left leg bone number 4 and press and hold Control Tab and select pose mode. Now you're going to notice some new options have showed up. New tabs have shown up on the right side of our screen, and we'll select on the Bone Constraints tab, and then we're going to click on the Add Bone Constraint Inverse Kinematics. Now in these settings here, we'll select Target, and we'll use this little eyedropper tool, and we're going to go right over here to the armature. Select that. For bone, we'll select left leg IK target, And for the pole target, we'll select the bone armature as well. And for the bone option, we select left leg IK pole. Now, you've noticed that there's some deformations of the bones, but this is okay, this is normal. The next thing we need to do is change the chain length to 4. And the reason for that is because we have 4 separate bones in the IK chain. Next, we have to adjust the pole angle to bring the foot bone back to the correct front orientation. And so you might have to play with this a little bit. It might be 90, 180 degrees, or negative 90, negative 180 degrees. So you just might need to play with it a little bit. So you can see here we're adjusting it. So pretty sure this is about negative 90 degrees. And you can see there that it's back. And now if we switch the perspective here to a front view, you can see that it's pretty straight. We're at a pretty good spot there, I think. So now that we have the inverse kinematics set up, if we switch to a side view here, and we select the IK target handle bone here, and we hit G to grab, you can see how the leg bones are responding based on where the handle is positioned. They're automatically changing their position. However, the foot bone there is still changing its angle based on where we have that. That's actually not responding correctly. So there's a setting that we have to correct here. So if we hit escape and put that back, and now if we select the left leg foot bone, and we go over here to our bone properties tab, and under relations, little drop down menu, there's an option here, a checkbox called inherit rotations, and we'll just deactivate that. Now when we come back to our side view and we select the IK target handle and we hit G to grab, there you can see that the foot bone is not rotating at all, it's staying stationary. And that's so when we're setting the foot down, the tip of the foot is actually going to be touching the ground first. So anyway, that just shows that inverse kinematics is operating correctly. And as well, if we switch to a back view here and we grab the pole bone and we do a G for grab, you can see how the bones are adjusting their position based on the position of that handle. Now, in order to allow foot rotations using the pole bone to position the feet, we need to apply rotation constraints. So we have to make sure that we have the foot bone selected. So we'll do that here. And then we click on the Bone Constraints tab. And we'll say Add Bone Constraint. And then we'll select Copy Rotation. Now for the target, we use the little eyedropper tool and we'll click on the bone's armature. And then for the bone, we'll select left leg IK target. Now the foot bone is just flipped and rotated 180 degrees there. So to correct this, we need to change the target and owner to local space. And that should snap the foot back into the correct front position, as you can see there. Now when selecting the IK target handle while in pose mode, if you were to try to do rotations now, you can see there that that works correctly there. And if we change to the Z axis, you can see how it's inverted there. So that's not working correctly. As well as in the Y, you can see how the rotations are opposite to each other. So we have to correct that, and the way that we do that is we select the foot bone, and under the copy rotation settings, we have to go in here to the invert section and we'll select Z and Y and both highlight those for inversion. So now if we select the IK target handle and we apply rotations and we select the Z axis, you can see how it's responding correctly. And if we select the Y axis, you can see how the rotations are also responding correctly. That's the way we want it to work. So you can see how applying inverse kinematics to our bone structures definitely makes things a lot easier when we need to position the bones for setting keyframes. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to apply this as well to the right leg. So you can go ahead and do that, but we're going to move along here. So now the next step for us is to link the bones of our character here to the objects. Now before we do that, I just want to point out that right now you can see that our model does not have what's called an armature modifier assigned to any of the objects within the model. So if I expand each of the objects, you can see that we do not have what's called an armature modifier present. So an armature modifier essentially holds and tracks all of the bones' positions and rotation data. And this is actually a requirement for the Sausage64 exporter plugin, the one that we installed previously. So I just wanted to make a note of that, and that when you are linking your bones to the objects in your model, and if you do that in a way that does not generate an armature modifier, you're going to run into problems when you're exporting your animation sequences. So this is just an FYI, but don't worry, I'm going to be showing you how to do everything properly. So now let's link the bones armature to the objects in our model. So we just confirmed that we're in object mode. And then what we're going to do is over here on the right side of our screen, we're going to highlight all of the objects in our model. So we'll just highlight all of those, but we leave armature unselected. Then over here in our 3D viewport, we'll place our mouse cursor just over top of the bones armature. And then we'll press and hold shift and then left click. Now you can see everything is highlighted here. Then what we're going to do is press Control P. And then for set parent, armature deform, we're going to select with empty groups. So now over here on our right side of our screen, if we expand the armature here, you'll notice that the objects in our model now have an assigned armature modifier. So that's been added. As well, there are now vertex groups for all of the bones that are in our bones armature. And so we're going to be using these to properly assign the weight values, which essentially dictates the level of control that a bone has over an object's vertices and all the vertices that make up that object. Now, if we were to try and move the bones armature now, so if we switch this to pose mode, and we selected the root bone here, and we press G to grab, you'll notice that it has not been linked to any of the objects yet. We still have yet to assign any weight to the objects. So to assign the vertex weights to the object vertices, we need to use the mode called weight paint. So we just make sure that we're in object mode, and then we're going to select the bones armature. And then what we do is we shift left click on one of the objects that we want to edit and add a weight value to. So we'll start with the head object. So we'll press and hold shift and then left click on the head. From there we press and hold Control Tab. And then we select weight paint. So now you can see that the head has changed color to a color blue. And the reason for that is that that represents a value of 0, a weight value. So what we're going to do is we're going to move our cursor over top of the head bone, which is this bone right here. So we're going to press and hold shift and then single click. So the displayed colors on the selected object indicates the weight value that is assigned, or the weight level. And so blue indicates 0% or no effect at all. You can then have cyan, which represents about 25%, green is about 50%, yellow is 75%, and then red is 100%. So we want to aim for 100% weight value assigned to this object here for the head. So what we're going to do is we're going to paint this and until the entire head object is the color red. So we're going to just start, we just single click here and we just start painting the head. You can see how it's starting to change color here, and then we can shift around and just sort of paint it all, make sure that everything turns red. And you'll slowly see how it will eventually all change to a solid red color. Just to get all angles, make sure that we don't miss any spots. Okay, so there we go, that looks pretty good. So that is for the head bone, and this is the selected object that we have, and it is now the color red. So if we were to put the cursor over top of that bone and we press and hold shift again and then single click, it deselects that bone. So now if we select the neck bone or the root bone, press and hold shift, single click, you can see now that the head object has turned to the color blue, and that represents a weight value of 0. So it means that this bone here does not affect this object or its vertices at all. It has 0 effect on it. So if you deselect that and then go back to the head bone, it goes to red, which means it has 100% control over all of its vertices. So that's what we have to do in order to abide by the hierarchical modeling method. We have to make sure that only one bone is ever affecting a vertice or an object's vertices. You cannot have two bones that are trying to manipulate a vertice or its vertice data. So now we'll go back to object mode, and we're going to select our bones armature, and now we're going to select the neck object. So we'll press and hold shift, single click on the neck, and then we will press Control Tab and then select weight paint again. So now that this object is selected and highlighted, we're going to be applying a weight of 1. So what we're going to do is just highlight the neck bone, or the root bone, because that's the bone that we want to have affect this object. And then we're going to start to paint that. So we'll just move that all around, change the angles here. And now if you notice that it's not allowing it to paint properly, you see how it's just not changing there, it's because this object is actually inside of the head. So what we're going to do is actually hide the head from view. So we just come over here and we'll hide that, and now you should be able to paint that and apply it and change the color of it to red so that it has a weight value of 1. So we're just going to go through that, go through, zoom in here a little bit. It's probably pretty good. There, we change that a little bit. But sometimes it can be sort of subtle and it's kind of an orange color, so you just have to really make sure that you apply it correctly. So I think that's pretty good. So I think we're good there. So we'll just re-enable the head. There we go. Put it back into display. So now we'll go and select object mode. So now for the hips, we're going to assign the root bone to those. So we select the bones armature and then shift and left click, and then we press Control Tab and then weight paint. And we just make sure that we have that root bone selected, and then we start to paint here. And we'll just make sure that we have that painted correctly. And now if there's any uncertainty and you're sort of not sure if it's all covered, you can hide the neck from view if you wanted. So what we'll do is we'll scroll down here to the neck and we'll hide that. Then we can just zoom in, shift this over a little bit, change our perspective, and just continue. So now we'll bring the neck back into view. And we'll zoom out here. So I think that's good. And we'll go back to object mode. We select the bones armature and then put our cursor over the left hip, shift, left click, Control Tab, weight paint. And we have that root bone selected, and we'll just go through the same process of weight painting that, making sure it's all red. And I think we're good. Okay. So we'll go back to object mode. All right. So the way I'm going to do this, I think, is the way that I'll assign these is I'll have leg object 1 and 2 assigned to bone 1, and then objects 3 and 4 to leg bone 2, and then this leg object here to this bone, this sphere here to leg bone 5, and then the foot, of course, will go to leg bone 6. So in object mode, we're going to select the bones armature, and then we're going to select left leg 1, press and hold shift, left leg 1, then control tab, weight paint. So now this object is going to be assigned to this leg bone 1. So we'll deselect the root bone, and then we'll select the leg bone 1. And now we'll go ahead and paint this. Now again, if you're concerned, you can always hide the sphere from view on that joint. But as you can see, it's been painted just fine there. It all has a value of 1, so I think we're good. So now we'll re-enable that left leg 2. Now we'll go up here to object mode, and then we'll select the bones armature, and then we're going to press shift and hold, and then left click on the sphere. This is left leg 2. Then we press and hold control tab, weight paint. So this left leg 2 object are going to be assigned to leg bone 1. So we'll just go ahead and apply that paint, weight paint of 1.0, make it red. Now again, you can hide the 2 objects around that in order to help you paint that if you're concerned at all. And then once you're done, you just reactivate those. Okay, that looks good to me. So now we'll go back to object mode. All right, so now we'll select the bone armature, shift and left click, and then control tab, weight paint. Now we're going to make sure that we have the left leg bone 2 selected. So we'll deselect all the bones here, and we'll only select this left leg bone 2. And now we'll paint that. And again, if you're having issues painting and it's not going to the red color, you just have to hide the 2 objects that are adjacent to it on the list here. So now the whole object is visible, and it should paint a lot easier. So that looks pretty good. Okay, so now we'll reactivate those 2 objects so that they're visible. Okay, so we'll go back to object mode, and we make sure we have the bones armature selected. Now we're going to go for the sphere, so that's left leg number 4, and then we'll press and hold control tab and weight paint. And we're also going to assign left leg 4 to this bone here, left leg bone 2. So we have that selected, so we're good. So we'll just continue to paint here. Add the weight, make it all red. And again, can hide the 2 objects surrounding that. Make sure we get it all painted correctly. So now we'll re-enable those two objects. And we'll go back to object mode. Make sure our bones armature is selected. And then we'll select left leg 5. Press and hold shift, single click. And then control tab, weight paint. So now we have to assign this object here to this bone here. So that's leg bone 3, left leg bone 3. So we'll press and hold shift, deselect that bone, and now we'll select left leg bone 3. And now we'll do our weight painting process. So now as you can see, it's not really responding well, so we'll hide both of those left leg 4 and 6 from view. And then we should be able to paint that properly. Okay, so that looks good. So now we'll just reactivate the two spheres, and then we'll go to object mode. So we'll select our bones armature and then left leg number 6. So press and hold shift, single click, and then control tab, weight paint. And so now we want to assign this object, left leg number 6, to this bone here, left leg bone number 5. So we'll deselect this bone here and then zoom in, put our cursor over top of that bone, press and hold shift, single click, and then we can start painting. Again, we'll hide the two adjacent objects. Could even hide the foot here if we wanted to be certain. Okay, so we'll re-enable the left foot and as well as the two adjacent objects so that they're in view, and that's good. So we'll go back to object mode, and now we have our foot here, the left foot that we still have to do. So we'll select our bones armature, press and hold shift and single click on the foot object, control tab, weight paint. And so now with that selected, we can go ahead and paint that red, get it a weight value of 1. Rotate around here, zoom in. So then we go back to object mode. So now just as a test, we can go into pose mode. So we'll select the bones armature, and then up here we'll select pose mode. Now we'll select the root bone, and what we're going to do is press G to grab, and then we're going to move this bone. So now you can see there's a problem here. We have one of the spheres, it seems to be linked to one of the bones, but there's one of the vertices has not been weighted properly. As you can see, it's stretching that. As well, one of the spheres is not linked properly, so we'll have to go in and fix that. So any of the objects that are showing up with improper weights being assigned, what we can actually do is just simply go and click on those objects. So we'll just highlight them in object mode, we'll just highlight them. So for instance, we had this sphere, which was object left leg 2. And what we can do is go into edit mode, so we'll hit tab, And then in edit mode, we'll just put our cursor over top of this and hit L, and that will highlight all of the vertices for that specific object. And then what we can do is up here in the menu under vertex, we can click on that, and then we're just going to scroll down here to vertex groups, and then we'll say remove from all. So we'll click on that. Now that's going to essentially erase any of the weights that were added to that object. It'll just remove them completely. So now we'll just go back and repaint that. So we'll go back to object mode, and we'll select our armature, and then we'll press and hold shift and then single click on that object here, which is the sphere, and then we'll select weight paint, or you can also hit Control Tab, weight paint. And then we'll press and hold shift, select this bone again, which is what we wanted to assign to this. Now as you can see, it's all highlighted in blue because we removed all of the weight that was assigned to it originally. And now we're just going to redo that. So we'll just paint this right through, and again we can go and hide the adjacent objects as well as the armature, just so that we have a perfect view of the object and get it painted properly. I think that's good. So now we'll go back and show those two objects as well as the armature. And now if we go back to object mode and we select the bones armature, and then now we select pose mode, and then we select the root bone and we press G to grab, now you can see that that sphere is now responding correctly. So now we still have a couple of objects. We have the two hips as well as this sphere here that we need to correct. So another way that we can check to validate whether the weights have been applied correctly. So as an example for this object here, we can go back to object mode and we will select this left hip, which was not assigned correctly for some reason. Now we'll hit tab to go into edit mode. And then what we can do is just zoom in here and we can see the vertices for this object. So if we just click on one, we should be able to see any weight values. So this still does not have any weight value present for the vertex data, for the vertex group. So what we're going to do here, so if we hit tab and we select the right hip, which does have the weights properly assigned. So now if we hide the right leg 1 and the neck objects around this cube, and we hit tab to go into edit mode, now we can select all of the different vertices that are on this object. And as you can see, each one is showing a vertex weights value, and it's showing here that the bone applied to that is root bone, which is correct. It's this bone here that we want to assign, and it has a weight value of 1, and that's correct, and that should be the same for all of these vertices. And as you can see, it is correct, and that's why we're able to control that object. Now if we go out of edit mode and we select this object here, this cube here, which is the left hip, and then we hit tab to go into edit mode, and now we select all the vertices, you can see that there is no weights value applied. So that's why it just was not assigned correctly. So we'll go back into object mode, and what we'll do is we'll actually hide the leg from this object, leg 1, so that we can see the object completely. And we'll select our bones armature, and then we'll put our cursor over top of that object and hold shift, select, and then we'll press Control Tab, weight paint. And so now we want to assign the root bone to this object, so we'll put our cursor over top of the root bone, press and hold shift, select, And now we'll weight paint this object here until it is all red, as we did before. So sometimes it might happen where it doesn't properly assign the weight values, but we can just always go in and check that with those values in the edit mode. So now if we go out of weight paint to object mode, and now we have this object selected, and then we hit tab to go into edit mode, and now you can see that the vertex weights properties here are showing root bone with the weight setting of 1.0, which is correct, and that should be the same for all of these vertices. So this should work now. So if we go back and we'll enable all of the objects that are surrounding that hip, and if we zoom out and we'll go back into object mode, now we'll select the bones armature, and then we'll go into pose mode. Now if we go to a front view by hitting numpad 1 on our keypad, and then we press G to grab, and now you can see that both hips are now responding correctly. And if we change to a side view and we select the root bone again, G to grab, there you can see that we have all of those selected objects are now properly weighted. So now we still have to do the right leg, so we'll go ahead and do that. And now if we select our armature and we select pose mode, and now select the root bone and press G to grab, there you can see that all of the objects are now responding correctly. Go to front view, numpad 1, we'll press G to grab. There you can see that all of the objects are now responding correctly. Now we also have our inverse kinematics pole bone and target bones that we can use to position the robot when we're going to be setting up keyframes. And that will be in our next video, where we'll actually apply textures and as well start to create animation sequences. But you can see here by selecting the pole bone, we can maneuver the robot angle of its leg into different positions. And as well the target bones, we can select and position the legs in different spots for when we're creating keyframes. You can see how we can rotate the head as well. So there'll be some interesting positions in creating keyframes for the animation sequences that we'll be doing in the later video. So we've successfully rigged this robot, and now we're at the point where we can actually export this model to the Sausage64 file format. However, there's still two last-minute things that we need to do before we can export, and that is we need to scale this robot up to a specific size. As well, we need to apply all transformations. So I'm going to do that now. So first, before we do that, I'm just going to open up this sample project just so you can have an idea of the actual scale size. So when you create a little cube here in Blender, it's usually about 2 meters in height. So if we put our 3D cursor here, you can see under view for 3D cursor, the Z-axis here is measuring about 2.0 meters from the world origin point. So that's the height of a new cube that we placed in the scene. Now the robot model, or any model that you create that you're going to be exporting to the Sausage64 formatted file, we need to scale that up quite significantly. So as you can see here, we have this robot at a height here. So if I hit Shift C to place it at the world origin point, and I move the cursor to the top of the robot, you can see that I've got it set here to a height of 400 meters. So it's quite significant, but if you're up around 300 meters, it's probably okay. With this robot, I found, because of the size of the spheres that I was using, just to avoid getting any errors, I found if I scaled it up to about 400 meters, I was not getting any errors. So now, the model that Boo342 had created, his was about 250, I believe. And so just make sure that you're around 250 and 300 meters in height from the world origin point. You'll be okay when you're exporting your model. So now I'm going to open up my project again, reload the project. So this is our model here. And now if we go to the front view, and now if I move my 3D cursor to the top of the robot, you'll see that our Z-axis height here is at 12.28 meters. So we're going to have to scale this up quite a bit. So we'll use the selector tool here, and we're going to select the entire model, all the armatures and the objects. Go to a front view, and we're going to scale out here a little bit. And now we're going to enter in a value for the Z-axis of our 3D cursor to 400 meters. So now if we zoom out, you'll see that this is the 400 mark. That's 400 meters there. So we're just going to place our mouse cursor over the robot, and then we'll hit S to scale. And we're going to bring this up. And I'll zoom out here a little bit more. S again to scale, and then drag up till we reach the top of that 3D cursor. And I'll move this down, zoom in here. There we go. So that's the requirement. That's the height that we want to have our models at. Between 250, 300. Just with my model, I chose to put it at 400, but you probably don't have to do that. It's just with the model that I had. But if you do get certain errors about your model being a little too small, you can scale it up like this. However, the model that Boo342 had exported, his model was about the 250 meter height. So just make a note of that. So now we'll hit save here. And the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to apply all rotations. So we'll select all of our model here, hit Control A, and then we're going to apply all transformations. So we'll do that, and then we'll hit save. And that's a pretty critical step that you need to do. Otherwise, when you export the model and you load it in CHORIZO, it might not display correctly. So just remember to do that. So now we're going to actually export the model. So we're at that point now. So if we go File, Export, and now we choose Sausage64 character.s64 file format. Select that, and now we choose our export folder location and the file name. And here it is here, .s64 file. And we'll go ahead and hit save. And here you can see at the bottom, file exported successfully, and there's no errors here. So sometimes you might get errors show up in the bottom of your screen, and they would be referencing an issue with your scale size of your model. But just realize that even if you get those errors, chances are you'll still be able to load your model in CHORIZO and preview it in CHORIZO. So we'll go ahead and open up CHORIZO now. So here's the CHORIZO program. Okay, and so we're going to go up here, File, import the Sausage64 file. Here it is here. We'll go ahead and say Open. And there it is there. So it was exported successfully. Now, as you can see, we don't have any textures applied, but that's okay. And we have all the meshes here that we had assigned to all the different bones and the vertex groups. And so as you can see here, we have the head bone, left leg bone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the root bone, which comprises the neck as well as the two hips. That's the way we had assigned it. We also have right leg bone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in the next video, we're actually going to be applying the textures, and as well we'll add some animation sequences which will then show up here once we have created those in Blender, and we'll be able to test those in Chorizo as well. So that's today's video, everybody. So again, in the next video, we're going to be applying textures and creating various animation sequences. We'll likely create an idle animation sequence as well as a walk cycle. So that's it. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we will see you in the next video. Take it easy. Bye for now. Ciao.